Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of IBMTV International Broadcast Media Television, and I'm the host of this show. And on that World Edition on IBMTV International Broadcast Media Television, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about innovation, and how we together can build back better and stronger, not only as the United States of America, but as the world, as we beat and defeat this pandemic. Today, my monologue is about the company Apple. I've been very busy the last few days because Apple announced in North Carolina, close to my home city that's affecting Morrisville, that they will be creating 3,000 jobs to create their new East Coast campus in the United States of America. This is more than a $1 billion investment into the North Carolina economy, and it's expected in the next 29 years to have a $1.9 billion economic impact. It's an engineering hub. They'll be working on artificial intelligence and machine learning and software engineering, among other fields. Hiring is expected to begin right away, and this is part of Tim Cook's and Apple's plan to create 20,000 jobs in the United States in the next few years through innovation and emerging technology. The average salary, $187,000. It's a $430 billion plan that's creating the 20,000 jobs in the U.S. over the next 5 years. I wanted to begin with this positive news because I do think it could be signs to come of an emerging economy. The fact that companies like Apple, even in a downtime, are continuing to grow and invest. We also will talk about tax incentives. Apple has received up to $187 million of tax incentives, potentially $187 million, to come to North Carolina. This is a deal that former Secretary of Commerce Copeland and Governor Cooper and the entire economic development staff of North Carolina has worked hard. And they're going to invest $100 million in infrastructure. And we've talked about infrastructure on this show: roads, water, utility infrastructure, broadband, and $112 million into schools and community. Today, we're going to also be talking about President Biden's address to Congress as he wraps up the first 100 days as our president of the United States. But as I close out, the Apple announcement is also bringing up a number of issues which we talked about in the show. Dr. Rawls was again on the news this morning, the president of Wake Tech, talking about how this announcement is already forcing Wake Tech and other community colleges to up their game in terms of the curriculum, working with Apple on the jobs of the future. And this is also happening in colleges across the country and in North Carolina. When it's all said and done, this technology giant is once again doing their part to bring innovation to North Carolina. It's a huge investment and a huge win. And maybe where you're listening, wherever you are in the country or world, Apple will be thinking about investing in your community. I want to congratulate our governor, the elected officials who are working with this initiative, and I'm really ready to roll up the sleeves and work as they just are bringing their campus only a few miles from where I sit at City Hall. Thank you very much. And we're now going to bring the show on live with Mark Lee, Sasha Starr.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. And so
Good morning.
I was very busy yesterday working on bringing in 1.9 billion, guys, with a B, into the economy, and hiring is beginning already for the 3,000 jobs. So I thought we would talk today about what you all think this means in terms of Apple, the big company coming in, their future. Mark Lee, we'll start with you. And then I want to talk a little bit about tax incentives because that's an issue we don't talk a lot about. And so the way it works is the Commerce Department can give cash grants and reductions in tax liabilities for companies if they hit certain marks. So it's not just giving cash out. They've got to hire aggressively and make these investments to get those incentives. But we're going to talk about, is that the best way to do economic development? So Mark Lee, we're going to start with you. And we also have Rakesh from New Zealand. So I'm in a good mood today, guys, because I'm riding this wave. I'm riding this wave.
With that question. Oh, he's back. Welcome back.
Yes, I'm back. I was just going to say that we're already seeing a lot of the HBCUs. We know that we have 3 of them here in the North Carolina area, and particularly the Triangle, that being North Carolina Central University, Shaw, and St. Aug, are trying to rally their forces to make sure that they have the correct courses as well, so that the students from the African American community can get some of those jobs. So I've already seen and heard from some of my friends in those universities that they are making overtures toward Apple to see what they can do to make sure that those universities are not left out. And it's not just the ones here in the Triangle, but I would argue that probably the ones from as far away down as Charlotte, and maybe even some of the ones up in Virginia, like Virginia Union and Hampton, are also making sure that they are part of the conversation as well, because we don't want to see, we want to make sure that there is equity. That's a favorite word of mine and everything within the hiring process. So I know that they're trying to make sure that they have the correct courses and the correct qualifications in order to actually be among the folks that are being looked at, kind of like the way that you were talking that folks are doing in the community colleges as well.
Okay, great. Sasha, what is your thought about this big announcement with Apple in North Carolina?
I think it's a wonderful announcement, of course, for North Carolina. It's also somewhat political announcements, not just business. There's a political notes as well. However, let's take it at exactly what it is. It will be creation of a highly paid jobs, well-qualified jobs. I'm not so sure that people in North Carolina, or a lot of people in North Carolina, will be qualified even to fill this job. So it will be most likely influx of qualified people from all over United States to fill these jobs. And it's still a very good deal for North Carolina because from all perspectives, taxes and business development, everything else is just fantastic, cannot be overestimated. And hopefully everything will go through very smoothly, and good luck with that.
Thank you so much. Shaquille, what is your thought about Apple, but what is your thought about tax incentives?
You know what? I'm not going to make any comment here at all. Good luck. I hope it has the intended and desired outcome for North Carolina.
Thank you. Well, we're gonna talk about President Biden's address in a minute. Rakesh, what do you think about Apple expanding so aggressively? Do you believe this is good news, obviously, for our economy, or are you
investing in the United States? Certainly, it's good news because that's what the object is, to recreate the middle class. And as Sasha said, if there's the right, kind of population to fill up those jobs, that will just, foot the bill.
Well, we're going to come back and talk about this. I wanted to start with good news, just in terms of North Carolina, but I do think that, it is a very interesting announcement, and I think that it does show positive signs of economy roaring back as we are getting very close to herd immunity. Hopefully by June or July, most of America will be getting back to a relatively new normal. And but let's segue now into President Biden is addressing Congress this evening. I'm going to start with Shaquille Latimer from Down Under. My question is, so today he's going to be talking about his $200 billion plan for childcare. He's going to continue his focus on infrastructure and the Jobs Act. What are your thoughts about what the president's going to say this evening? Any insight about what concerns you might have?
Well, again, I don't know if I'd say concerns. I just think he's going to come out. It's going to be much of the same stuff. I think he's going to reinforce that inclusion of people of color and minority groups in the economy is part of infrastructure, and all that sort of stuff. And it's just going to be the same divisive kind of language that we've heard from this administration so far. And there isn't really going to be any unity. There's not going to be any care or consideration for the concerns of Republicans. That doesn't mean that his policies are not good. Maybe they are, but I don't see this as being this being a moment that's going to unify Congress and go, oh, this is such a great plan, let's all get behind it. I think it's just going to be the same sort of a repetition of the same divisive stuff that we've heard so far.
Yeah, he's also going to talk about police oversight. And I could go through a long laundry list of things that he promised that isn't done and things that he promised that is done. But, we talked about, climate change, the rescue plan, the recovery act, the infrastructure bill, the immigration stuff, policing, race. Mark Lee, going into this.
Can I just say something there about that though with climate change? It was very interesting what AOC said the other day, that that taking land from from First Nations people and the disparity amongst the races is a cause of climate change. And then she also tacked on there that healthcare and education is a cause of climate change, which I find quite fascinating, because most countries in the world have universal health care. Certainly most wealthy Western countries have universal health care. So to take that seriously, one would have to conclude that international countries, because this is supposed to be an international movement, should not care about pollution out of other major industrial countries like China, but actually the international community should be worried about universal health care, which is ordinarily a domestic policy issue for the United States, that the rest of us should be worried about, universal health care in the United States, because without you having it, the world's climate change is going to happen. You take these really extreme, like completely irrelevant points of view, like things that have got nothing to do with one another, and just link them all together, and then that's the policy, and that's the problem. And that's, what does healthcare have to do with climate change? What does climate change have to do with infrastructure? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, I think I guess they're trying to tie it in with you have the climate change, and then you put these green technologies that create a lot of jobs through innovation. But I think sometimes,
but it's I think frankly, and I'm not one to say I'm offended by things, and I'm not offended by this either. But I think frankly, it's quite offensive for America to stand on the world stage like you did recently and talk to all these different countries about the things that need to happen in order for there to be a worldwide consensus and the whole world to do something about climate change, and then bring in your own local domestic policy issues up on the international stage. Okay, that is so. I mean, I know you guys think you're a really great country and all, but that's like pushing it a little bit far. If we're going to talk about climate change on an international level, let's talk about climate change. But if you guys are just trying to score political points domestically, then do so. But don't insult the rest of us around the world and suggest that somehow somebody who doesn't have health care in any country, in any state of the United States, as tragic as that may be, please don't suggest that the whole world, therefore, is going to suffer climate change as a result. It's just nonsense. It's just politics.
I hear you, Shaquille. If I could just jump in. My guess is that they're trying to tie, and this is just me guessing, I am somewhat of a fan of AOC. I don't agree with everything she says, though. But my guess is that she is probably trying to tie it into issues like the food deserts and a number of other things that do take place in some of our poor neighborhoods and things along those lines. Now, how she phrased it, I didn't see the press conference or whatever she made the statement, so I'd have to read what she said about that. But I do know that sometimes folks do see climate change as the issue of the day, for lack of a better term, and it has gotten some folks in trouble. Even our local here in Durham, Mayor Pro Tem and everything, she definitely, as part of her one of her campaigns, I think she was asked one of the most pressing issues of our time that needed to be talked about, and she said climate change. And a lot of folks, she wound up winning, and she's still the Mayor Pro Tem. But a lot of folks were looking at her like, wait a minute, we've got housing issues, we've got issues in our school system, we've got this issue, and we've got that issue, and you think climate change is the number one issue. So definitely she was able to rally her forces and win, but at the same time, she definitely got a lot of flack in terms of the community and everything. Like I said, there's a powerful PA here that was able to help her navigate through that and win and everything. And actually, I had the pleasure yesterday of attending for part of it a event that they were doing on race equity. One of the actually 3 of the major PAs were involved in this conversation around race equity because of our local county commissioner, who is the county commissioners and the county manager. The county manager is African American, and the county commissioners is split. It's a Muslim woman who would be perceived as definitely minority and everything, 2 African American women and 2 white women, and he's had run-ins with the white women, and they have tried to make it into a racial issue and things of that nature. So that's part of the reason they were having that conversation around race equity.
Again, Mark, that's a US issue. I mean, the food deserts. I've spent a lot of time in the United States. I think it's tragic that so many American families don't have enough food, and there's food insecurity there. Of course, it is. But sorry, there's some really poor countries out there to get on the international stage. I mean, like an Australian is supposed to care more about the food insecurity issues that Americans are facing rather than what Australians are facing in poor communities in Australia. Somebody in New Zealand is supposed to care more about the food insecurity issues of poor Americans than their own poor in New Zealand. I mean, the UK has got massive amounts of poverty there as well. The idea that you guys jumped on the international stage and brought your own domestic policy issues up on the international stage as being a cause of climate change is so insulting to the plight of the billions of people on this planet who are far worse off than the poor people in America. I
would definitely agree with you on that. And like I said, I consider Jillian to be a friend, a Duke graduate, and definitely a very intelligent woman and everything of that nature. In some ways, she's like our local version of AOC. But I would definitely not agree with that statement that she made. So I probably would not agree with the statement that AOC made. Like I said, I don't always agree with everything that folks on the liberal side make and everything of that nature. So I agree with you that there are definitely, to do that on the world stage is a disservice even to her own legacy.
We're going to go to Sasha. We're going to give everyone a chance here. So, Sasha, what is your thought about Biden's address to Congress today? What would you like to see him say? In addition, climate change, immigration, vaccination, race, police, gun shootings, but the most important thing is the infrastructure bill and childcare. $200 billion for childcare.
Okay, everything what he's going to talk today is a part of a much bigger plan of Biden and Democratic Party. By doing all the right moves from their perspective, of course, bringing in, for example, Puerto Rico and Delaware, and packing the Supreme Court, and all other measures, stimulus checks and everything else, it will result in the Democratic Party will control a U.S. government, presidency, and everything else for next at least 20 years, so most likely much longer. Now, if that's the name of the game, and you must agree with that, because the name of the game of each political party is to remain in power as long as it's possible. So in that way, Biden and Democratic Party accomplishes right this. So so far he's doing brilliant moves. He has still almost year and a half left, and as much as he can grab in this year and a half, the stronger the position of Democratic Party will be. It's not going to please a lot of people, especially Republican-leaning people, but well, they have to come up with good ideas that would excite constituencies, Americans at large. They have to rethink the policy of Trump being their leader still after everything what's happened. And if they would be able to do that, they may regain their power in probably in 20 years from now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Rakesh, what is your thought about? I'm going to end this line of questioning with Shaquille. What is your thought about the president's address tonight to Congress in the United States?
To be honest, I haven't heard it, so I'm going to.
Well, no, it's going to be
pass
this
on it.
evening. What if you were how would you rate this president so far in his first 100 days, Joe Biden?
I think he's doing a reasonable job. I don't know a great deal about it, but from whatever little I've seen, he seems to be doing a reasonable job. He seems to be realistic, pragmatic. For example, when he sent those battleships to the Black Sea, when he realized that all that he'd be doing is putting those sailors' lives in jeopardy, he turned them around. So he didn't stand on ego. He just turned them around, and he's trying to talk with Putin. He's trying to get America involved with the international community. I think he's a pragmatic, experienced hand. I wouldn't expect anything dynamic or daring from him, but perhaps his vice president could sort of fulfill that part of the deal.
Yeah, and I think Shaquille, I'm going to end with you, and then I'm going to ask. Well, let me ask you, Shaquille. So there's been a lot of focus on domestic policy, especially on World Edition, where a lot of the stuff we've talked about is vaccination, climate change. You gave us your feedback on that, and I do, by the way, agree.
The climate change shouldn't be a domestic issue.
But it's a foreign policy issue, though, how we work with world countries to address climate change goals, policing, law enforcement, immigration. Foreign policy, we've talked about Afghanistan pulling out, but do you believe this president isn't talking enough about foreign policy? And if he does, what are the things he should be talking about?
Well, I don't think this president's talking about very much at all. I mean, he hasn't really been as accessible, or like Donald Trump, you couldn't shut him up. He was always talking. He'd be walking to the helicopter, he would talk to the media. Biden hasn't done that. And look, it may be for good reason. It may be because, a lot of people criticize the fact that Trump always had something to say. But look, there's a lot of very complicated international issues. Pulling out of Afghanistan, I didn't really think that was a good idea when Trump was proposing to do it. I think we have to be very careful about instability, especially in regions of the world like the Middle East, that we don't want to see that flaring up again. Now, I'm not an expert on Iran. I'm not an expert on Afghanistan or Israel or any of those regions. I have spent a little bit of time in the Middle East, but not enough to really know the areas. So I just think that we have to be very careful. And I think that these sorts of decisions should be made based on what makes the most amount of sense as far as national security and military control, rather than what makes the most amount of sense in politics. A lot of people criticized, if we go back in time, a lot of military people criticized President Clinton because the military leaders weren't able to make decisions. And what ended up happening was everything had to go back to Washington. And I think it's important that people that have more experience in certain areas are making those decisions, especially when it comes to geopolitical flare-ups. But yeah, I mean, that's probably as much as I can say on that. In relation to climate change, again, whether you believe climate change or you don't believe climate change, whatever your stance on it is, I think that most people would like to see the planet be a bit cleaner. Most people would like to see us get as much energy as we can from sustainable sources, so we leave a better planet for the next generation. But we need to actually have proper conversations about how to do that. And I feel that at the moment, the mainstream media and mainstream politicians are turning this into just politics. You're on our side or you're not on our side. And I don't think that's very helpful. And that's really the main point that I'm making.
Okay, thank you. That's a really great point. Sasha, we're gonna go for a few more minutes on this and then talk about other things. President Putin, Prime Minister Putin said, if anybody crosses the red line, you're going to be in trouble. And so the elephant in the room is Russia. What does the president do on that response? And what do you think Putin was telling the world? Is he talking about it with Ukraine? Is he talking about it in general? I mean, I feel like pulling out my old Cold War movies now. Jack Ryan and Hunt for Red October. Are we heading back to the Cold War?
You see, every time when Putin opens his mouth and something is coming out of it, it always has two sort of aims. Is one is on its citizens, so it's internal kind of message, and another one is external, focused on U.S. and Western countries or so on. So when he's talking about red lines, he might as well talk about green lines and yellow lines and all kind of other lines, because nobody even knows where are those lines. In fact, Mr. Putin said that I don't know where are those lines. We will let you know later where are those lines. So we are discussing now what actually doesn't exist. Now, what are the consequences of those imaginary lines? Basically none, absolutely none, because we know very well that there will be no nuclear war, for sure, 100%. So it's all a political, military, and all kind of games. As we discussed a couple of days ago, economically, Russia is very weak and cannot compete with not even US, Western countries, or many other countries. So the only threat is that Russia is very skillful in playing their poker game and trying to create image of its pact with China, Iran, maybe North Korea, to have this type of, and if United States is not skillful enough to repair all the damage which was done by Donald Trump with its Western allies, then Russia, its image as one of the countries in a very strong pact, which includes Russia's military power, China's economical power, and Iran and North Korea as world hooligans. That creates kind of interesting opportunities. So what Biden really should do, ignore all the lines proposed by Mr. Putin and concentrate on repairing damage. And
can I just ask you a question? What damage you're talking about?
I'm talking, yes, I'll explain. I'm talking about the damage where Trump, in his attempts to appease Mr. Putin, almost destroyed NATO. He started to become obnoxious on the meetings with Western leaders, demanding that they must pay more money and talking about all kind of nonsense, which is not for the overall the world consumption. It has to be discussed and resolved in a private conversations between the leaders and come to amicable solutions. Trump failed to do it. He actually appeased Mr. Putin, and if he would be stayed in power for another 4 years, that would be the end of NATO, and that's exactly what Mr. Putin was trying to achieve. That damage that I'm talking about, that's damage that Mr. Biden has to repair, and the sooner is the better.
Well, I think go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just asking the question. I think Donald Trump, in his very toddler kind of way, he asked the question: if NATO was created to protect the world against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union isn't there anymore, why do we still have NATO?
Russia is
Russia's Soviet Union's not there, and his request for the other countries who are more so beneficiaries of NATO to provide more funding to NATO, so the US isn't doing it. Why is that? Why would that be unreasonable? I mean, look, I didn't follow this very closely, but to me, it didn't seem unreasonable that a US president, with a country that has massive debts and huge trillion-dollar deficits, would be saying, why are we spending all this money on NATO when other countries like Germany are not equally contributing?
Well, the thing is that he was asking the his questions about reasonableness, he was asking in the wrong place in the wrong time. It's not the public forum to ask certain questions, because NATO is a closed club of certain countries, and you cannot discuss these questions because it's not only Germany or France, it's also Poland, it's also Czech Republic, it's also Hungary. There are a lot of members, even Turkey. There are a lot of members in NATO. So if you have some grievances and you want to try to improve the situation, you have to call the meeting behind the closed doors and discuss and put on a table whatever you're discussing. But when you're discussing that openly, you're discrediting the NATO, and all what he was trying to do is appease Mr. Putin.
I don't think it was done in order to appease Mr. Putin. I think it was done because that's his personality. And I will say that I don't see that there's any great harm done to the Allies because he did it in that way, any more than I see that there's any great harm done to other Western countries that they decided to make climate change about domestic race relations in the United States. That it had no bearing on climate change, just like maybe he should have dealt with this in a more diplomatic way with NATO. But he didn't. But I don't see that there was any great injury. If there is any great injury, then what is the solution? Are the countries that benefit from NATO going to say, well, look, we don't want to deal with the United States anymore. We don't want to be part of NATO anymore because we're upset about your former president? I can't.
That's exactly the case, because when he discussed that, let me just finish. When he discussed that with European leaders, after that, they had emergency meetings to discuss how NATO will survive without US. So they discussed the possibility of US getting completely out of NATO. That type of damage Mr. Trump inflicted on NATO, and that's what Biden must repair now in the next foreseeable future, ASAP.
Sasha, they had a meeting to discuss how they will continue to run and operate NATO if the United States pulls out. The United States hasn't pulled out. What damage is there exactly?
That this has been in open discussion. That's what's the damage. So Russia now knew that NATO is not only that NATO is being divided, that there is a huge rift between US and European leaders. That type of damage was done by Mr. Trump. But he doesn't even understand that his limited intellectual capacity wouldn't allow him even to understand that.
Rakesh, what is your take on? We're going to hear from Rakesh and Rex. Go ahead. What's your take?
I just want to mention something about NATO. I think NATO, America needs NATO as much as Europe. That's the first thing you've got to understand, because if there's even an informal alliance between Russia and China, and there is, you will find that America needs NATO as much as Europe. And Trump did cause damage to NATO. And Merkel made the comment that, we cannot depend on the US as an ally. So whether there's any basis for it, I don't know, because, we're not privy to those conversations and those discussions. But definitely, NATO was weakened by Mr. Trump. He probably has his own perspective, but I think at this point of time, the US needs NATO as much as Europe. Yes, I understand only Turkey and Britain amongst NATO kept up with their contributions to NATO. France and Germany were probably the biggest defaulters. But I'm not sure about the Scandinavian countries. I don't know how good they were either. So,
how is NATO weakened? Is NATO less powerful than what it was? How?
NATO fundamentally represents the force, the unified force of the Western nations. And there is an article in it which says that if any one country is attacked, all countries will come to rescue, which is the reason why nobody messed with Hong Kong because, Kowloon and the island were given in perpetuity to the UK. And even being a superpower, China didn't want to mess with those two areas because they would have faced the full force of NATO. New territories was the only part on lease to the UK, and unfortunately, Mrs. Thatcher didn't have the brains to see the value of having an outpost in the Pacific. That's all right. That's another story. She's another version of Trump, but that's all right. Just a female version of Trump. So she was stupid. That's all right.
I now understand why somebody like me, who has never attacked Biden, who has never said that Trump's the great guy, but has only ever spoken about policy, is referred on this channel as being like the ultra conservative. Like here I am,
I wouldn't say ultra conservative. I would just say somebody with
and we've got to go down there.
I would just say that Trump didn't understand strategy well.
Previous leaders like Margaret Thatcher.
No,
I noticed
that's all right. That's enough noise, Shaquille. I'm just saying that Trump's got to understand strategy. At this point, the USA does not dare to send its carriers into the South China Sea. It does not dare to send it because one of those anti-ship missiles would blow them to kingdom come.
How is NATO?
Rakesh and Shaquille, if I could just jump in real quick, I have a question to ask both of y'all and everything, but it's something that's just popped into my mind that I'm curious about, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this. The pandemic has definitely taken the world stage, and for that reason, a lot of the international conversation has been around the globe unifying to fight the pandemic. And because of that, we haven't had a lot of conversations around trade wars, and there have been trade wars in the past. As we're slipping away from the pandemic, and hopefully the world is getting a hold of this through vaccinations and other things, and this is to everybody, including Rex, is there a fear that we might go back into more trade wars? Because I definitely know that overall, we've been saying on this channel as well as in other media outlets, if we're becoming more of a global economy, and we like the fact that it's a global economy, that there are folks working with Ghana, working with Nigeria, working with India, but there haven't been that many, because of the pandemic, sanctions or other things against countries, even countries that we may not agree with. So do you think that we're going to see a return to that? And should we see a return to that? So that's my
one thing I wanted to
jump in here. Sorry.
Rex, I'm sorry. Let's hear from Rex. Let's hear from Rex real quick. I'm sorry, Rakesh. Please.
So what we're seeing, even on this show, is exactly what China wants. China wants discourse between individuals in Western countries over matters of politics, whether it's race or even our adversaries. We've now politicized our adversaries. We can't get Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. to agree that China, Russia, and Iran and North Korea and all the other countries they're associated with are our adversaries. We don't look at all of them in the same basket. On one side of the aisle, they're more favorable to China. On the other side of the aisle, they're more favorable to Russia. That's exactly what they want. We did a show last week with Casey Fleming, the CEO of Black Ops Partners, who laid all this out. This is what we're facing today is unrestricted hybrid warfare, and we're falling into the hands of both Russia and China on both of these matters. You have Sasha arguing the fact that Trump was compromised by Russia. Well, that's no secret. He had business interests in Russia and all of that, as well as China has compromised Biden through his family's interest in the money that they made in China, as well as in Russia as well. Those are facts, and now we not only have we made politics out of our adversaries, our news media is taking sides based on this, and we're being fed a steady flow of disinformation about what these countries are and what their end game is. Their end game is to become the superpower over the world, and they're working together. And every war that we've been involved with after World War II has been a proxy war between the superpowers, and that continues today.
Yeah. may I jump
Yeah,
in now?
yeah. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that, if proxy wars have been waged not just by China and Russia, they've also been waged by the USA.
Exactly.
There is no real, one person being better than the other. But the point of the matter is, first of all, the pandemic is not over. Look at what's happening in India. You're having it blazing like a wildfire. People are dying. I know everybody that I've spoken to, including my sisters, know at least 10 people who've died of COVID. I myself have lost a classmate from business school who was fit, healthy, no comorbidities, nothing. Just lost,
So let me ask you a
COVID.
question real quickly, Rakesh.
Sorry, Rakesh.
Rakesh, where's the
Yeah.
liability for the spread of this disease? Who, at the end of the day, if you were to do connect the dots, what country is responsible for this disease?
I would say very definitely, in as far as India is concerned, it's the attitude of the people. They didn't take it seriously.
No, but
Yeah.
the disease, the origins of it started somewhere.
Yeah,
And
that's a virus.
there was a
That is
country
going to happen.
responsible for containing it.
That's a virus. It's going to happen, whether it happened in China first, whether it happened anywhere else. It's going to happen one day or the other. The way we
So it
mess
just
with the
there's
environment.
no liability on anybody's part here.
I
It's
don't
just
think
a-
so. I think virus is just an accident. It was not that China started it. If you've got evidence that
I'm
China
not saying they
started it,
started it. I'm not
Yes,
saying it's
yeah,
even
if
it
you've
was
got
even
evidence-
created in a lab. I'm not saying that. Once it was
Yeah.
identified, the country of origin had a
It just-
responsibility
yeah,
to not allow their citizens to travel all over the world
Fair
and
enough.
get on cruises.
But bureaucrats, they're going to try and suppress it. It's whether it happened in the US or anywhere else. That's the natural reaction of bureaucrats. It's going to happen. Don't tell me the US would be any different. I don't think so.
Well, I think that we're going to pivot into some other issues, but I think.
Hey, Rex,
first of all-
just really,
Yeah, go ahead.
Rex, just real quickly, I'm just curious because I've heard that argument before, not just about China in the sense of the COVID pandemic that we're in the middle of now, but there have been people historically that have said the same thing about the responsibility of AIDS and the responsibility of the U.S. in that disease and everything. So would
Yeah.
you agree with those folks that said that? Because there are folks that have definitely said that.
Yeah. No, there's liabilities on any government's hand who neglected to handle this properly. I'm not saying one country's innocent over another, but if the origins of it started in your country and you identified it, which they identified it as SARS-CoV-2 back in the fall of last year, and you're allowing your citizens to just travel willy-nilly all over the world, then there's some liability on your part for the containment of this. There's some responsibilities there. Why is it Trump's
So I'm not saying that-
responsibility?
so I'm not saying that this is- I'm not saying that-
Real quickly, in the United States, the spread of it in the United States, why is that the fault of a Republican side and not the Democrat side or the country of origins? If we're going to pin the responsibility on one party, which they were in power and it did spread under them, and they should be held liable for that, then we equally have to hold the country of origin liable for this as well. We can't just go, well, it's only an accident
Rex,
that happened on the world stage, but it's the responsibility.
Do you know
So
the Spanish flu
hypothetically,
started?
hypothetically,
Do you know
Rex,
the
so
Spanish flu
hypothetically,
started in
if we
a
can
farm
prove-
in Kansas? Do you know
Say
that
what?
Spanish flu started in a farm in Kansas, not in Spain?
Right.
So what is the liability that the US took for that?
Very
For what?
good point. The Spanish.
And that's
flu.
where I was going to go with AIDS as well, because some people have theorized that AIDS started with some activities in the U.S. science labs directed toward the African continent. That, like I said, whether that's true or not, but I've heard definitely theories
Yeah,
around it.
I heard that when I lived in Rwanda.
first of
I
all-
heard the same thing.
Before we pivot into another issue, my take on it is that I don't know the answer of these are global pandemics. They start somewhere and they spread. So, whether it started in China and the Chinese government could have done a better job of not letting people travel, maybe, that. But I do think that, in my opinion, this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. In my opinion, as the president of the United States and the leader of the country that's the leader of the free world, Donald Trump was a complete failure in his leadership on the COVID pandemic. And because of his lack of his leadership, over 500,000 people in our country died, more than World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Democrat attacking a Republican.
Yeah,
His
you
lack-
are. You're saying that
No,
because
his
you're-
lack
Yeah.
of leadership. His lack of
right.
leadership.
That's
No,
right. It's
no, let me finish, Shaquille. Let me finish. When 500,000 people die in your country because you say that this is a virus that's going to go away, that you can take Clorox and hydrochloroquine, and you piff it off as some kind of a joke. You don't wear a mask. You ask thousands of people to come and think. The other world isn't going to take it seriously. That's all I'm saying. So the President Trump was a failure on this, and that's why he was
But
voted out
hey,
of
hey,
office.
real quickly, hey, you crossed the line there. The don't wear a mask came from Fauci. All the way into March of last year, he said, don't wear a mask, go take your spring vacation, there are no worries. When they knew this was SARS-CoV-2 from the fall, and the CDC on their website already had the game plan on how to deal with SARS-CoV-2 since 2003. On their website, it stated that any patient with SARS, that it could be spread airborne. Any patient with SARS needs to be dealt with a mask and distance. They didn't call it social distancing, but they said to stay within 6 feet, stay away by 6 feet or more from that patient. That was already on the CDC's website. And when they already knew this was SARS, but they don't call it SARS, they called it COVID. And then they didn't want anybody referencing the CDC's website on how to deal with SARS, and that game plan was already on there. So the disinformation started with Dr. Fauci, as far as I'm concerned, and our Surgeon General, who were both out there telling the American public, don't wear your mask and do that. That wasn't Donald Trump. That was Dr. Fauci and our Surgeon General saying that.
Shaquille, finish up. I'm sorry.
Now you've just said it's not because you're a Democrat that you're criticizing Donald Trump. Well, guess what? I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat because I'm not American. So let's just look at things from just some facts and just from, let's just calm down on American politics for a second. You have a constitution in the United States. A lot of this has to be handled by the state. I don't see any compliments going to Republican governors when they've handled it better than, say, some Democrat governors have handled it. I don't see any of that. I don't see anybody jumping down Rakesh's throat when he starts having a go at Margaret Thatcher. Nobody says, but Margaret Thatcher's a woman. You can't say that. But if somebody criticizes Kamala Harris, you can't say it because she's a woman.
No,
so
why not?
let's just be realistic here. Everything to do with this pandemic and everything over the last handful of years has all been about divisive, partisan politics. The World Health Organization also had a duty to the international community to provide advice as best as they could. And instead of that, they decided to start taking sides in international politics and to start becoming partisan themselves. So let's not just blame all of the COVID cases in the world on Donald Trump. And when you say Donald Trump is the leader of the world,
the
yes,
COVID cases
true,
in India,
the rest of our countries are in alliance with the United States. But we also do have our own sovereignty. We also handle things ourselves really well. If you're going to give Donald Trump all the blame for COVID outbreaks around the world, then you must also give him credit for countries like Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, etc., who have handled the pandemic really well, and give no credit to our own country's political leaders. That's a farce.
Shaquille,
So let's not go down that divisive.
the problem in India has got nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's got to do with Modi and the Indian people.
That was a comment that was just made. And Rakesh, how would you feel if your criticism of Margaret Thatcher just then was responded to by me saying, how dare you criticize her? She's a woman.
I never said don't criticize Kamala Harris. Criticize her all you want.
Well,
I've no problem with that.
that's the world we live in today. If you criticize her, you can't do so because you're a racist.
Then
or you're
just develop a thick skin and don't bother about it. I wouldn't bother.
First of all, Shaquille, I mean, I appreciate your points as always, and I just was making a point that I just believe that the pandemic strategy in America is going better, but we should also be open to address.
In fairness, Steve, the vaccine's out, and can you tell me that you really believe that between the time that President Biden was inaugurated and today, he's responsible for 100% of the vaccine rollout, and President Trump did nothing?
I do agree with that. Yes, I believe that the vaccine.
So Trump did nothing for the vaccine. Trump did nothing. Trump
He did. He did. I will give him credit for Operation Warp Speed and for developing the vaccine.
You did just say that everything he did in relation to the pandemic was done wrong. That he didn't handle it very well. What about the ships he sent into New York? President Biden got the vaccine before he became the president. So I'm not saying you can't criticize Trump. Let's criticize him, absolutely. But let's not just flame the former president and give every compliment to this one, because when you do that, you stop being able to objectively see how to make progress. That's the point that I'd like to finish that comment on.
You've forgotten one very important fact. Trump disbanded the team that was set up to deal with pandemics. If that team was there, it wouldn't be just left to Dr. Fauci. It would be left to that whole team of experts. Trump disbanded them. He's responsible for that.
Trump also strengthened the health department in
No,
other
he
ways.
did not.
Okay, all right. Well, look. Again. I like to look at policy and I like to weigh up the pros and the cons. And what ends up happening is you guys all turn around and say to me that I'm some sort of ultra conservative because I don't agree that every single thing he did was wrong. Okay?
I agree with you with many things. I don't believe Trump is responsible for India.
Tell me then, Rakesh, can you name one single thing that Trump did that you actually think was good?
I think the way he handled the economics of America before the COVID, I think that was excellent.
Yeah,
I think the way he looked
at
at America as a business, that was fantastic. And
Yeah,
I think the way he put pressure on Apple to bring back its factories into America, I think that was A1.
He did also implement economic zones and underserved communities. He did, and all that infrastructure is being.
All in agreement about that. Then why do you guys keep making out that I am some sort of mental case?
It's not an attack on you.
I suggest that what Biden is doing by going backwards and reversing Trump's ideas is going to be likely to be a bad idea.
No,
Yeah,
we're not
but
saying
what Trump did to NATO was really stupid. That was really stupid. He just made more enemies.
Together, what he's done is on the international stage, he criticized NATO. That's it. That's all he's done.
He only criticized Germany and France, not the rest of NATO. Turkey was paying its bills. Britain was paying its bills. He criticized Germany and France because they were being silly.
Steve, I know we're getting ready to wrap up, but I did have one other quick question and everything, which is to everybody on the panel. We oftentimes hear, and we've heard it for years, the conversations around the UN and NATO, the World Health Organization, and all of those. They're supposed to be organizations that are ways that the countries of the world are able to cooperate, work together, things of that nature. Sometimes it seems like they don't really do that much in terms of actually doing that kind of work. And there's been talk historically about the effectiveness of those organizations. So I know it's probably a long question, and maybe we'll have to take it up some tomorrow as well. But I guess I'll start with Rex. Rex, do those organizations have any sort of future? And if so, how can they be effective? I think that they were started in a wonderful spirit of, I believe after one of the world wars, of trying to make sure that the various nations are actually able to communicate and share knowledge and even resolve some of these things that are going on in the world, and to some degree be what we sometimes become, meaning America, of the police of the world as well. But is that something that is even feasible in the 21st century?
Well, my whole problem right now with NATO and the United Nations and what's going on the world stage is the fact that, again, I go back to the we politicized our adversaries. We don't look at them as a whole. And if you're not including China in this equation, then these organizations are failing because China's influence over not only the United States, but other countries is apparent in what's going on. And I think to some respect, I give China credit for what they're doing in Africa in terms of economics and so forth, but there's a price to be paid for that. But the United States basically pulled the ripcord on Africa a while ago, other than, being in there to influence politics again through the Arab Spring and some of the damage that we did there. That's all coming back to haunt us, where they were concentrating on actually building up infrastructure in that country. And you can look at, I can think in two levels here and say what they're doing is good, but at the same time, the influence that they're going to have over that strategically is being ignored by organizations such as NATO and the United Nations and so forth. You watch it'll look good on paper, and there will be a lot of money flowing in there, but eventually you're going to see a lot of damage that's going to be done in regards to threats to the West that NATO needs to be staying on top of.
Yeah, I think. Well, I want before we've got a few more minutes to close out. But first of all, I just want to thank Shaquille Latimer for being so passionate about his positions, and I think it does show, Shaquille, that we all have to get better politically of listening to understand, not just listening to reply. So I apologize, and what I was saying is, in my opinion, President Trump could have done better on dealing with the pandemic. But that's not to say that there are other things that he did that was good. And you're right. There are Republican governors like DeWine in Ohio, DeSantis in Florida, others who have done a good job. And I think the circumstance we're in today is because of the media wars that we're fighting, that, you don't know where the news is coming from, right? And so, Shaquille, we thank you. And I just want to tell you that you're my friend, and I wasn't meaning to attack you. But this is wonderful. This is the kind of fiery debate that we're seeing in our nation. And really, maybe we're sort of an example of why our country is so divided, because of the passion. But,
if the pandemic is the biggest threat to us right now, can anybody explain to me why an open border 120 miles from where I live in San Antonio, Texas, makes any sense at all? Regardless of people flowing or whatever, if the pandemic's that big a deal, then you got almost 15 to 20 million Texans that are scratching their head, going, "Why the hell do we have an open border right now in the middle of a pandemic, especially with what's going on in India?"
I can answer that question for you,
Yes,
Rex.
I agree.
That's because you're being racist, and racism is a form of climate change, and you hate the climate. And so if you don't hate the climate, you're going to have an open border. Steve, can I just say that?
I'm just using common sense here, man.
If we weren't friends, Steve, obviously I wouldn't be able to make the comments that I make. And look, because we don't have any real Republicans that come on here, you don't see me go after them. And I do go after them when I'm in the United States. And there's photos for those of you that want to look on the internet. There are photos of me with some high-ranking Republican members. I just believe that in order for us to focus on the issues that really matter to us, we should focus on the issues. We shouldn't focus on identity politics. It shouldn't matter who the leaders are. Let's worry about the policies. And that's where I stand on it. And I'm pretty comfortable being a centrist. I'm centre-right on some issues. I'm centre-left on others.
We need compromise, and y'all know I bash Trump myself, and sometimes I come off as pretty far left in some of my criticisms as well. But there is compromise, and I can look at some policy issues that make sense, and that's where I think what Shaq, you're saying, I think I agree 100%, where we should look at the policy itself, like what the policy is on our southern border is today. Look at the policy ourselves objectively, because it's not just Republicans in Texas that are complaining about it. It's Democratic congressional officials who have now been silenced by the mainstream media. They can't even get media airtime, and they're Democrats and they're Hispanic, and they're complaining about all the threats from having our border open today. So it's not that they're just shutting down the Republicans in Texas and Governor Abbott. They're shutting down any Democratic official in the state of Texas that has a complaint, like Henry Cuellar, who's a Democrat who's been very outspoken about all these threats. So those are issues, you've got to look, you can't look at it as Democrat and Republican when both Democrats and Republicans in Texas are being shut down right now.
Well, folks, we have run out of time, and I forgot to tell everyone today, I'm wearing my pink because it's a breast cancer awareness events going on this weekend for the Susan B. Komen Cure for the Cancer, all virtual races. So I want to thank them, and as we rid the world of the dreaded disease, cancer. Rex Lee, you're a cancer survivor, but we thank you for being on the show. Rakesh, thank you for greeting us from New Zealand. Shaquille Latimer, you fiery conservative from down under, just joking. And Shasha Star, thank you so much. And on that note, we started the day with Apple. We're excited about that great news. And we are looking forward to President Biden's address to the United States Congress, his first congressional address since taking the presidency. We'll be talking and now analyzing his talk and his congressional address. And I'll end on a good note of how we help India. There is aid going in right now, PPE, masks, equipment, raw materials that the U.S. government is providing India to develop the vaccine. If you have a loved one who's sick or someone that's dying, we pray for you. Travel restricted is shut off. It's a very dark and terrible time right now for many Indian American families in the United States and all around the world. But look for some local charities. The American Red Cross is taking funds and donations, and I'm working with BAPS, which is a global spiritual organization headquartered in India and all around the world. They have a local chapter here, BAPS Charities, and they've got feet on the ground and supplies. The money goes directly to India, so you can go to bapscharities.org. And their founder, Pramod Swami, said a famous quote, the late Pramod Swami, who was a revered leader around the world, that in the joy of others abides our own joy. And I think that's a great way to end the show. And as they say, Jai Swami Narayan, which means peace and love be with you always. But I want to thank the BAPS community for doing their part. And let's pray and help India rebuild back better as well. They are going through COVID hell right now. And we pray not only for India getting through this crisis, but for India's future. On that note, we'll be back tomorrow to address President Biden's congressional address. Be safe. Be safe wherever you are. We will see you tomorrow.